It's Monday, the January transfer window is open, and you know what that means. The Monday show is back. The Thursday show will be back this week as well. This month I'm going to be bringing you more thoughts and more insight on transfers as well as match reaction. So today we're going to be looking at the Spurs game, but also the transfer rumours around Newcastle United. Let's get into it. Hello, good morning and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Apologies for the festive absence, if you like, a few quieter days, partly because of the festivities, partly because I've not been particularly well. If you remember last year, I had about 10 days off from making videos for the same reason. You can probably still hear it in my voice. I'm not 100%, but back doing videos on the channel on Newcastle United this month. There will be a podcast coming this month as well on non-Newcastle United things with like debates and analysis. So before we get into all this, as always, please continue to like, share and subscribe if you're excited for videos in 2025. Plenty more stuff Newcastle related and non-Newcastle United related coming on the channel this year, hoping to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the season, and then we can really kick on and take this channel to a new level. So please do continue to support me. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It would mean a great deal. But we'll get straight into it with first a look back at the Tottenham game on Saturday, a quick review of the game. How did I think it went? And obviously the result is fantastic. It's now 6 wins in a row in all competitions for Newcastle. The turnaround is complete, basically. Out of absolutely nowhere. It was inexplicable at the start of the season why they were playing so poorly. It's not inexplicable why they're playing so well now. I think the team is confident and playing in a structured way with Sandro Tonali at the 6, Bruno higher up, impacting the game. That midfield three is now what it promised to be when Tonali arrived. Looks balanced and working together. Anthony Gordon's back in form. Alexander Isak looks connected to the team. It's not a surprise that they have reinvigorated their season, even though I did say they're in decline just a few weeks ago because they look stale, and that was the message coming out of the club. It doesn't feel like that anymore, and actually off the back of this run, Newcastle can get into the January transfer window with a lot more momentum, and I'll explain why in a minute. But this performance wasn't the best in the second half. I thought Newcastle could have gone for the jugular a bit more. Spurs were obviously depleted and quite poor in the first half. Newcastle turned the game around after conceding early to a Solanke header. Then Gordon equalises straight away, and then Isak scores for the 7th game in a row. He's now level with Alan Shearer and Joe Willock in that regard. So there was a basis from which to build at half-time, and they didn't do that. Early Dragisson, Spurs' only recognised centre-back, came off. So you're thinking Jed Spence next to Archie Gray, neither of them are a centre-back against the best striker in the Premier League at the moment. That should be a bloodbath. They dealt with them really well, and Spurs brought their attacking players on at 2-1 down. And you thought this could get a bit dangerous, and Spurs played well in that second half, I thought. But Newcastle should have done more to control that game a bit. But the result is fantastic, and they did enough in that first half to win. And they look assured. They look like they're back to their best. And it's a great place to be in. Newcastle currently 5th, which could be a Champions League spot at the end of the season. There's a real thought process that they can attack this January window now because they've got momentum. And I think what's crucial is last year, at this stage, they were really struggling. They'd had a terrible December. They've had a fantastic December this year. They look reinvigorated, refreshed. They're sort of now, all of the benefits of not playing in Europe now look to be benefiting them, even though they've got midweek games coming up against Arsenal in the Cup this week and Wolves in the Premier League next week as well. But there's lots of reasons to be excited about Newcastle United at the moment, and they were on show again against Spurs in that first half. Bruno, I thought, was majestic. Botman coming back and playing well. I thought he looked a little bit rusty early on, as you can imagine, and was involved in that goal. He got beaten to the ball by Dominic Solanke, but overall Newcastle were in control. They looked like the better team just like they did at Manchester United on Monday, just like they did against Aston Villa on Boxing Day. That's 3 really tough games that we all looked at in the fixture list and thought that's going to be a test of their mettle back to back over the winter period. If they're not in good shape, then they could really be struggling there, especially with 2 of them being away from home. But they absolutely passed them all with flying colours, and managed to assert themselves and look like the better team than all 3 of them. I think they are that's the truth of it. I think if you look at the squads and you did combined 11s with all three of those teams, most of those combined 11s would involve Newcastle players. They've shown why in this game. The January window is where we can really get our teeth into now, because I do think that there might be a change of attack in terms of what they do this window. There was a little bit of, all the messaging has been very tentative, as you would imagine. It wouldn't be a very good negotiating tactic to say that Newcastle are willing to attack the window, but they've been very tentative. It's all sort of been sell to buy. We'll see what happens. But what Newcastle have always promised, and this was the case with their chase for Mark Gahey, which I won't get back into, but was really sort of looks like a terrible decision. It was questionable then. It looks like a terrible decision now. It's a blessing in disguise argument that they didn't go for that and get tied into that. But the message was always the same, that they would go for the right deal if it came along. And I think there's a really good opportunity, given that the Champions League is there for the taking, if you like, at the moment, considering fifth place could be a spot for the Champions League next year, which would help them keep the likes of Bruno and Isak and Gordon for a lot longer. And all that talk of, if they don't get into those positions, then one or two of those players might have to go, and the whole project starts again. There's a real opportunity to build on it and attack it and take this project to the next level. And get to that great revenue stream that everyone talks about, which is the Champions League. Anyway, there's a lot of risk involved in that, but if the right deal comes along in January, I think that they might well go for it. There's been a lot of talk of Khusanov from Lens, a young centre-back who's had a breakout season. I'm not going to say I know too much of him at the moment, because I haven't seen too much of him, but it's his breakout season in Liga. £20 million is supposedly the fee. Lots of other clubs are interested as well. Manchester City and Tottenham and Chelsea have all been linked. That's a really good, interesting sort of profile of player, which really gives you the impression that Paul Mitchell is stepping up. That's very much a Paul Mitchell signing. I think when Newcastle brought him in for the sporting director role, exploiting other markets seemed to be the way that they were going to try and go, and they didn't do that last summer, and there was a real muddle of what their approach was. And I came away from that window saying that Newcastle needed to be more proactive in other markets, looking at alternative players. Kusakov's had a great season. He's quick, he's good on the ball, he really fits the mould of what Newcastle want. And that is a great price if that's true as well, but lots of competition, and that could prove a difficult deal to do. So it would be interesting to see if they actually do go forward with it. I think if there's an opportunity, that's the sort of deal they will take this window, because it doesn't impact too much on the PSR situation. If, as it is, I think there is a little bit of wiggle room, and I think the wiggle room would be enough for £20 million. But the interest from Man City, which has come about since, the interest from Chelsea and Spurs and other clubs who've been linked, will only jack the price up. And the other thing I would say is that Ligue 1 is a good market to maybe exploit, because the financial issues that have been going on in that league for quite a long time because of TV rights deals, lots of clubs are struggling, and there's a sort of feeling in France that a lot of Premier League clubs will look at their players. It's always been a good market for quality, as you've seen with the French national team. Newcastle have exploited that in the past under the Graham Carr days, done really well from Ligue 1, but it was always about profit for the Ligue 1 clubs. Unfortunately for them, their sort of position to do that is weakening, so it means that more clubs will look at that market. I think it's very sensible for Newcastle to look at Khusanov. I think he's a really good player from what I've seen. As I say, I don't know too much about him, but it feels like the right kind of deal for Newcastle. This one might have some legs if the opportunity arises. But that comes back to what I was saying earlier. I think generally speaking, the opportunity is more likely to arise because of where they are, because of the momentum, because of the form that they've been in over the last few weeks. And that comes into Tyler Dibling as well. Right winger from Southampton, 18-year-old, really, really good player from what I've seen. Again, very intelligent, knows how to pick a pass, very good on the ball, very direct, very much an Eddie Howe type player. So you've got one who sort of feels very much like a Paul Mitchell signing, one who very much sounds like it would be an Eddie Howe signing. This one, though, I think domestic league, Southampton have already proven that they are hard sellers. Even when they get relegated, Newcastle had to pay nearly 35-40 million for Tino Livramento. Romeo Lavia cost Chelsea £50 million in the same summer as well. So he won't come cheap, especially because he's had so much experience and exposure to the Premier League. Tyler Dibling is very well known to Newcastle. Their interest has been long-standing for a number of years, ever since he was in the youth ranks and scored a hat-trick at St James's Park. That went viral a couple of years ago. So there's lots of interest in this one. I think, again, if the right opportunity arises, that could be a good possibility. But there are other names on that right wing list as well. Johan Bakayoko, I mentioned in the Q&A video, is somebody who they like a lot, and I think would be a fantastic deal. Somebody who I would have advocated for is Daniel Marlon, who's now been heavily linked with a move to Aston Villa. They've made bids of around £20 million. It sort of feels like the sort of deal that Newcastle should be doing, in my opinion, because his contract's running out, he's experienced, he can hit the ground running. Seems ideal for Newcastle in that situation. The right sort of attitude, good assisting numbers as well. I think that's the sort of player I would be looking for. But Tyler Dibling is a fantastic player, well known to Newcastle. I just have my doubts about whether the valuation would fit what Newcastle need, fit what Newcastle can afford, because they would hold a lot of cards, because as they did with Livramento, as they did with Lavia, they are ready to charge a lot of money. And perhaps from his perspective, staying at Southampton, even in the Championship next season, might not be the worst thing, because he's only a young lad. He can develop there and move on when he's more ready to attack the Premier League, because I'm not sure that he would be ready to step into Newcastle and play on that right-hand side, as well as some of the other names on this list. It feels more like it would be a Lewis Hall situation where he'd be a slow burner, and I think Newcastle really need somebody to come in and make that right-hand side spot their own, because this season they've had Jacob Murphy in a purple patch. 2 years ago they had Miguel Almiron in a purple patch. But when they don't have someone scoring goals and assisting on that side, they look a lot weaker. So they need somebody, I think, to come in and make a real impact straight away. And as I say, Bakayoko, Marlon, there's a few other players on that list who I think could do that. I think either way, Tyler Dibling will not leave in January. So this is one that might have to wait to the summer. But I do have my doubts about whether the valuation and the situation would really suit Newcastle and what they need right now. As I say, I think more looking abroad for sort of better value that can impact straight away would be better. But I do really like Tyler Dibling. I think he's a fantastic player. I just want to wrap up as well on talking about Alexander Isak and the sort of discourse around him this January and every single window. And I kind of feel like, I know that a lot of people have to fill airtime on TV and on their own YouTube channels and their own podcasts and all that sort of thing. And I know a lot of Arsenal fans and fans of, in inverted commas, bigger clubs would love to see him play for them. But I really don't like this sort of discourse that Arsenal, for example, should just throw the money at Newcastle to go and get him, because they don't have that money. Newcastle are in a really strong position. He's got 3.5 years left in his contract. They would charge around at least £150 million to sign him at any point, let alone in January. This is the sort of player that they're looking to build their whole project around, their whole next stage around. Obviously they do need to qualify for the Champions League and that sort of thing to match his ambitions. If they don't do that, there could be a question to be asked down the line. But at the moment there's absolutely no chance he leaves this January, because Newcastle need him to be firing, to be scoring goals, putting them in the position to qualify for the Champions League, to match his ambitions. He is perfectly happy at Newcastle. His rise has been something that has been expected from me, because I've watched him for years since he was in Sweden at AIK, and I've written a piece for BBC Sport that will be out tomorrow morning, so do keep an eye on that, on Isak's situation at Newcastle and how he's become the key man at Newcastle, overtaking perhaps Bruno and others in the process. But Newcastle were the ones who took the punt on him. Isak was a really, really highly rated player after the Euro 2020 when he had that great performance against Slovakia, scored 17 goals for Real Sociedad in his second season, had a difficult season after that. Lots of other clubs who looked at him, Arsenal being one of them, chose not to spend the money on him. Newcastle were told that they overspent on Isak when he arrived. But they were the ones who backed his potential. They were the ones who took that risk and showed their bravery, and now they're being rewarded. And I think that this idea that they're susceptible just to losing him because other clubs can afford him, which they can't, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I think it's disrespectful. There's nothing that any club can do to force Newcastle to sell him, certainly not in January. I think in the summer it could be a different question if they haven't qualified for Europe, but that looks very, very unlikely, especially if the Champions League position becomes 5th place, which Newcastle are very much in the race for. So I think Newcastle are setting themselves up for a really good January situation. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below on the players I've mentioned. Any other players you want me to discuss on Thursday. I'll also be looking back at the Arsenal game in that episode as well. Really excited to be bringing you the Monday and Thursday show again over the course of this month. Like, share and subscribe to the videos. Look out for the podcast as well, and that article on Isak on the BBC Sport website tomorrow. Thanks very much for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.